When we think of a banker, we imagine someone who keeps watch over our resources, someone who manages deposits, who approves withdrawals, who safeguards wealth. But today I invite you to see with spiritual eyes. God Himself is our divine banker. He does not run out of funds. His vault never empties. His supply is endless, and His investments never lose value. The world's banks can fail. Interest rates rise and fall. Fortunes can vanish in a moment. But when you anchor your trust in God's economy, you are tapping into a treasury that cannot be shaken. Scripture says, "My God shall supply all your need according to His riches in glory." That means your account in heaven is overflowing, waiting for you to withdraw through faith. When we say that God's treasury never runs out, we are making a declaration that breaks the boundaries of human limitation. Earthly banks have vaults, and those vaults can be emptied. They depend on deposits. They depend on markets. They depend on the stability of economies. When those systems fail, when markets crash, when debts pile up, the banks fall, and people are left shaken. But when we anchor ourselves in the reality of God's economy, we step into a truth that is not tied to inflation, recession, or scarcity. His supply is rooted in eternity, and eternity knows no lack. This is why Scripture declares that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. It is a way of telling us that the resources of the world are but a fraction of what belongs to Him. His treasury is not gold and silver only, though even those belong to Him, but wisdom, peace, strength, and favor. Think about this. Every good and perfect gift comes from above. That means the very air you breathe is a divine loan of life. The opportunities that unfold before you are withdrawals from His limitless account, and the favor that opens doors you could never force open is currency released from heaven's vault. When you understand that God's treasury never runs out, you no longer panic when the world announces shortage. You no longer fear when the economy trembles. You no longer shrink when your paycheck looks too small, because you know that paycheck is not the measure of your supply. God's abundance cannot be measured by numbers on a slip of paper. His supply is immeasurable, and it is tailored to the needs of His children. When a person puts trust in an earthly bank, they believe that their money is safe, that it will grow, and that it will be available when they need it. That is why people deposit money in the first place. But even with insurance, even with policies, people still worry about economic downturns, corruption, or collapse. Now imagine if that same trust, that same confidence, was placed not in a failing system, but in an eternal God, whose supply cannot run dry. Imagine depositing your faith, your obedience, your gratitude, and your trust into His hands, knowing that every seed placed in His account multiplies beyond comprehension. This is not blind belief. This is spiritual law. Just as sowing and reaping govern the natural world, sowing into the kingdom governs the spiritual. God's treasury never runs out, not because He merely has a lot, but because His essence is abundance itself. He is the source of all creation, and creation is still expanding under His command. If the universe itself cannot reach its end, how much less can His treasury run empty? When you begin to live from this understanding, fear begins to lose its grip on you. Fear thrives where people believe in lack. Scarcity is the breeding ground for anxiety, but faith in God's endless treasury replaces scarcity with sufficiency. You begin to see situations differently. A bill is not an announcement of defeat, but an opportunity for divine provision. A closed door is not the end of your journey, but a sign that a better one, funded by heaven, is waiting. A challenge at work is not a wall, but a reminder that your help comes from a supply that is bigger than your employer. God's treasury never runs out, and because of that truth, your needs can always be met. Consider the story of a widow with only a little oil left in her jar. By earthly calculation, her treasury was finished. She had nothing left but a handful of flour, and with that she prepared her last meal. But when the prophet declared that her supply would not fail, the divine treasury opened, and her oil did not run out until the famine was over. This is a portrait of how God operates. When the world sees the end, God sees the beginning. When the world says finished, God says replenished. When your own strength says empty, God says overflow. His vault is never diminished by your withdrawals. His supply is never depleted by your demands. Unlike human banks that require deposits to keep operating, God requires nothing to sustain his wealth. He is the source, not the borrower. The truth that God's treasury never runs out should change the way we speak. Words of lack should not come from our mouths. When we know our banker is never bankrupt, to declare, "I can't afford it," or "I'll never have enough," is to speak as if the divine vault is closed. But when you begin to say, "My God supplies all my needs," when you speak, "I live in divine abundance," you are aligning your words with his unending supply. Your language draws from the treasury, and your faith is the authorization code that releases what is already yours. Just as you cannot expect to withdraw from a bank with no authorization, you cannot expect to draw from God's vault without faith. But once faith is present, heaven's vaults swing open. Now, let us think of this in practical life. You may be facing a financial challenge. You may be wondering how the rent will be paid, how the fees will be covered, how the business will survive. From a human perspective, the figures may not add up, but when you remind yourself that God's treasury never runs out, you stop calculating lack and start calculating trust. You take the little you have, you place it in his hands with thanksgiving, and you declare that it multiplies. The loaves and fishes in the hands of men fed a small family, but the loaves and fishes in the hands of Jesus fed thousands, and there were baskets left over. Why? Because the divine treasury was accessed, God's supply was released, and lack became abundant. Even beyond finances, his treasury covers every area of life. Emotional strength flows from his vault. When you are weary, he supplies rest. When you are broken, he supplies healing. When you are rejected, he supplies love. These are currencies more valuable than gold, for what is wealth without peace, or riches without joy? The divine treasury is not limited to material provision. It is the storehouse of everything that sustains life and godliness. It is the vault where solutions reside, the bank where breakthroughs are processed, the treasury where destinies are funded, and it never runs out. This truth calls us to boldness. It calls us to live with open hands, not clenched fists. When you know your source cannot be depleted, you give freely, you serve joyfully, you bless others without fear that your own supply will run dry. In fact, the more you give, the more you access, because giving is the spiritual deposit that multiplies withdrawals. The treasury of God is not like earthly banks that penalize you for taking too much or charge you interest for accessing what is yours. Instead, the more you draw, the more you discover there is. The vault is infinite, and you can never bankrupt heaven. When you walk through life, let this be your anchor. God's treasury never runs out. This is not a motivational phrase but a spiritual reality. It means you can face the unknown without fear. It means you can stand in crisis with calm. It means you can believe in miracles when logic says impossible. The treasury of heaven is open, and it is your inheritance. Every time you choose faith over fear, gratitude over complaint, generosity over hoarding, you are proving that you trust your divine banker, and as surely as the sun rises, his supply flows, for his vault has no end, and his riches have no limit. Faith is the signature on the heavenly check, and without it no withdrawal from God's treasury is possible. In the natural world, if you walk into a bank and attempt to withdraw funds without proper identification, without a signature, without proof that you are the account holder, the bank will not release anything to you. Not because the bank lacks funds, but because you have not provided the authorization to access what already belongs to you. The same principle holds true in the spiritual realm. God's vaults are filled with limitless resources, blessings, solutions, and supply, but it is faith that authorizes the transaction. Faith is the divine signature that verifies your identity as a child of God and activates the release of heavenly currency into your life. When we think about faith, it is not wishful thinking or blind optimism. Faith is rooted in certainty. It is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. It is not pretending that problems do not exist, but declaring that problems bow to the authority of God's promises. Faith does not deny reality. It transcends reality. It sees beyond what the eyes can behold and grasps what the Spirit knows to be true. And because faith connects the unseen to the seen, it becomes the very mechanism by which spiritual resources are pulled down into physical experience. Faith is not complicated. It is as simple as believing that what God has said, He will perform. When you hold a signed check from an earthly account, you walk into a bank with confidence. You do not beg the cashier to release the money. You do not weep and plead for what already has your name on it. You hand it over, knowing that the funds are guaranteed by the signature. In the same way, when you hold God's promises, you do not need to beg or panic. You present them with faith, declaring, "It is mine because He has said it." That confidence is the spiritual signature that moves heaven's resources into your hands. Now understand this. Faith works in action, not in theory. It is not enough to merely think faith-filled thoughts while continuing to act as if nothing will change. Faith speaks, faith moves, faith behaves as though the check has already cleared. If you truly believe God supplies all your needs, you do not confess lack with your mouth. If you truly believe doors are opening, you prepare yourself to walk through them. If you truly believe healing is yours, you begin to rise with expectancy. Faith is active, not passive. Just as a signed check must be presented at the counter, faith must be presented through your words, your actions, and your mindset. Consider the example of Abraham. He was promised descendants as numerous as the stars, even though his natural circumstances screamed impossibility. His age was against him. His wife's barrenness was against him. Logic was against him. Yet he believed. Scripture says he did not waver in unbelief, but was fully persuaded that God was able to perform what He promised. That persuasion was his signature of faith, and it authorized the release of the promise. The result was the birth of Isaac, the beginning of a lineage that would bless the nations. Faith signed the check, and heaven fulfilled the transaction. The reason fear is so dangerous is because it erases the signature of faith. It is like tearing up a signed check before it reaches the bank. Fear says, "What if God does not come through?" Faith says, "God has already come through." Fear focuses on the lack. Faith focuses on the supply. Fear sees giants. Faith sees victory. Fear magnifies the problem. Faith magnifies the provider. The divine banker responds to the language of faith, not the noise of fear. Even when circumstances look impossible, a whispered declaration of faith, is enough to open the vault of heaven. This is why expectancy is critical. Expectancy is faith in action. Just as you expect to withdraw money after signing a check, you must expect your prayers to be answered after believing. Expectancy looks for the manifestation, prepares for the blessing, and rejoices in advance. Expectancy is not arrogance. It is confidence in the character of God. When a child asks a parent for food, they do not wonder if they will be fed. They expect it, because they know the love of their parent. In the same way, faith expects because it knows the goodness of God. Faith also refuses to settle for partial withdrawals when the full amount is promised. Too often, people ask for just enough to survive when God has promised abundance. They pray for small breakthroughs when God has promised overflow. Faith does not insult the divine banker by limiting requests to scraps. Faith signs the check for the full inheritance. It believes that if God said pressed down, shaken together, and running over, then that is exactly what will be released. Faith does not downsize divine promises to match human limitations. It enlarges human expectation to match divine capacity. We also see that faith must endure the waiting period. In the natural, when you deposit a check, there is often a period of processing before the funds appear in your account. You trust the process because you know the bank is working behind the scenes. In the same way, faith holds steady even when manifestation takes time. It does not cancel the transaction with doubt. It does not walk away impatiently. It waits in assurance that the divine banker never fails. Some answers are immediate, others require time, but all are guaranteed when faith holds firm. When you live with this understanding, faith becomes your greatest currency. It is more valuable than gold because it unlocks every other resource. With faith, you can access wisdom, healing, favor, opportunities, and provision. Without it, the vaults remain closed, no matter how desperately you knock. That is why Scripture emphasizes that, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Not because God is offended, but because faith is the system by which His supply flows. No signature, no release. But with faith, there are no limits to what can be drawn from His treasury. Faith is the signature on the heavenly check, and that means every promise of God requires your belief to activate it. You cannot outsource it. No one can sign for you. It must come from your own heart, your own words, your own confidence. Once signed, heaven recognizes it, and the treasury responds. Every time you declare, "I believe," you are authorizing another transaction. Every time you refuse doubt, you are protecting your withdrawal. Every time you rejoice in advance, you are preparing to receive. Faith writes your name on heaven's resources and secures the blessing that already belongs to you. When you deposit trust, gratitude, and obedience into your spiritual account, you are engaging in transactions that carry eternal weight. Just as in the natural world, banks respond to deposits with records, interest, and returns, so in the spiritual realm, every act of faithfulness becomes a credit in your heavenly account. Nothing placed in God's hands is ever wasted, and nothing sown in trust ever goes unnoticed. The divine banker remembers every seed planted, every act of thanksgiving whispered in the night, every step of obedience taken in the face of uncertainty. These deposits may seem small in the moment, but they accumulate into a treasury that begins to overflow in your life. Trust is the first and most vital deposit. Trust says, "I will lean not on my own understanding, but I will acknowledge Him in all my ways." Trust refuses to panic when things appear unstable. It is the willingness to place your confidence in the unseen instead of clinging to what is visible. To deposit trust means that when you are given a choice between fear and faith, you choose faith. When the numbers do not add up, when the diagnosis is grim, when the opportunity looks impossible, you still declare, I trust God's supply. Trust deposits are powerful because they are made at the very moments when your circumstances argue against them. Heaven recognizes that, and heaven rewards it. Gratitude is another priceless deposit. Gratitude says, I see what I already have, and I call it enough. Gratitude acknowledges that the smallest blessing is still evidence of God's hand. When you thank Him for what you have today, you are authorizing expansion tomorrow. Gratitude multiplies what it touches. A grateful heart sees abundance where others see lack. Two people may both have little, but the one who deposits gratitude into their account experiences increase, while the one who complains remains stagnant. Gratitude is not a reaction. It is the deliberate act of saying, thank you, before the harvest is visible. Gratitude is the soil where miracles grow, and every thank you is a seed of multiplication. Then there is obedience. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always fruitful. Obedience is the act of aligning yourself with divine instruction, even when it does not make sense. To obey is to say, God, I trust that you know more than I know, and I will follow your lead. Every act of obedience is like a deposit slip, signed in heaven's bank. When Noah built the ark, he was depositing obedience. When Abraham left his homeland, he was depositing obedience. When Peter cast his net after a night of failure, he was depositing obedience. These deposits yielded returns that blessed not only them but generations after them. Obedience opens the vault of divine favor because it proves your loyalty to the divine banker's system. It is important to note that these deposits do not vanish into a void. They are recorded in the invisible economy of God's kingdom. The bank of heaven is more reliable than any earthly institution, and the records of your trust, gratitude, and obedience are kept without error. This means that no deposit is too small to be remembered. A quiet prayer of thanksgiving is as valid as a large act of generosity. A hidden act of obedience carries as much weight as a public demonstration of faith. The divine banker sees every action, every thought, every motive, and credits it accordingly. Think of the widow who gave 2 small coins in the temple. To the world, her deposit was insignificant, barely worth noticing, but to heaven, it was a deposit of trust, gratitude, and obedience combined. Jesus himself declared that she gave more than all the others because she gave from her lack, not from her abundance. That single act of trust was a spiritual transaction that outshone gold. In God's economy, it is not the size of the deposit that matters, but the heart behind it. Trust deposits build resilience. Gratitude deposits build multiplication. Obedience deposits build alignment. Together they form a balance that cannot be shaken. When storms come, when systems collapse, when others are scrambling for answers, those with spiritual deposits find themselves sustained. They can withdraw peace in chaos, provision in famine, favor in opposition. This is why some people seem to walk in constant blessing. It is not random. It is the result of consistent deposits made over time. Another vital aspect of these deposits is timing. Sometimes the returns are immediate, like a check that clears instantly. Other times, the deposits remain stored, waiting for the appointed moment to be released. Just as in natural banking, where certain accounts grow interest over time, spiritual deposits often multiply in hidden ways until the fullness of time. Then, at the moment of greatest need, the vault opens, and the stored-up blessing pours out in ways you could never calculate. This is why obedience in one season produces provision in another. This is why gratitude today can become abundance tomorrow. This is why trust sown in tears can be harvested in joy. There is also a compounding effect in the kingdom. Just as interest compounds in natural banking, so do spiritual deposits compound over time. Each act of trust makes the next one easier. Each act of gratitude increases your awareness of blessings. Each act of obedience builds confidence for greater assignments. These deposits reinforce each other, growing into a spiritual wealth that cannot be measured in dollars or possessions. They shape your character, strengthen your spirit, and attract divine opportunities that money cannot buy. What is more, these deposits are transferable. Just as earthly investments can provide inheritance for children and grandchildren, spiritual deposits create blessings that flow beyond your lifetime. The prayers of a grandmother, the gratitude of a father, the obedience of a mother, all these create spiritual wealth that blesses generations. The divine banker ensures that no deposit ever loses value. Even after the depositor has left this world, the returns continue to flow into the lives of those connected to them. But we must also remember that neglecting to deposit has consequences. A bank account with no deposits eventually has nothing to withdraw. In the same way, a life lived without trust, gratitude, and obedience finds itself spiritually bankrupt when trials arise. People who only complain, doubt, or disobey are like those who constantly withdraw, but never deposit. Eventually, they face crises with nothing to draw upon. This is not because heaven is empty, but because their account remains inactive. The vault is full, but they have not authorized access through deposits of faithfulness. This understanding should change the way we live daily life. Every decision becomes an opportunity to deposit. Every challenge is an invitation to trust. Every blessing is an invitation to gratitude. Every instruction is an invitation to obedience. Living with this perspective means you never miss a chance to add to your spiritual account. Instead of worrying about what you lack, you look for chances to sow trust. Instead of complaining about what has not yet come, you sow gratitude for what already is. Instead of resisting divine direction, you step forward in obedience, knowing it is another deposit slip handed to the divine banker. Over time, these deposits create a lifestyle of abundance. You become a person who never runs dry, because your account is always active. You begin to live in overflow, not because you manipulate circumstances, but because you honor spiritual law. You understand that the divine banker is faithful, that he multiplies deposits, and that no act of trust, gratitude, or obedience is ever wasted. Each day becomes a banking day in the kingdom. Each prayer is a deposit slip. Each thank you is a coin placed in heaven's vault. Each step of obedience is a transfer of wealth into your account. You may not always see the balance on paper, but in the spirit it grows. And when the time comes for withdrawals, when you need strength, wisdom, provision, or favor, the vaults swing wide, and the returns of your deposits flood into your life. Nothing placed in God's account is ever lost. Every trust, every gratitude, every obedience is credited, multiplied, and returned in divine timing. Generosity is the first law of divine finance, and until this truth is embraced, the flow of heaven's abundance will always seem hidden. In the world's economy, generosity is often viewed as subtraction. If you give something away, you are seen as having less. If you release money, possessions, or time, the balance decreases. But in the divine economy, generosity is never subtraction. It is multiplication. Giving is the act of sowing seed, And no farmer who sows believes he is lost. He knows he is invested. The harvest may not appear immediately, but the law is certain. Seeds placed into fertile soil bring increase. So it is with generosity. Every act of giving is a spiritual seed that multiplies, and the divine banker guarantees the return. The principle is woven throughout creation. A single seed of wheat, buried in the ground, does not die without purpose. It breaks open, grows roots, and multiplies into a stalk, carrying many seeds. One seed becomes many, and those many can feed families. The one who hoards the seed in fear of losing it will never taste this multiplication. But the one who releases it, trusting in the Creator's law of increase, becomes the one who lives in harvest. In the same way, holding tightly to money, time, or resources, because of fear, leads only to stagnation. Releasing them in faith, however, triggers the divine law of return. Generosity is powerful because it reflects the very nature of God. He is the giver of all good gifts. The air you breathe, the strength in your body, the opportunities before you, these are all generous outpourings from His treasury. When you choose to be generous, you align yourself with His nature. You mirror His character, and heaven responds to such alignment with favor. The divine banker recognizes generosity as a valid deposit, one that attracts multiplied returns in both expected and unexpected ways. There is also a spiritual mystery in generosity. What you release leaves your hand but never leaves your life. It goes into your future, waiting for you in multiplied form. Think of a farmer scattering seed across a field. For a time, he sees nothing. The field looks empty, but underground, unseen processes are at work. The soil receives the seed, nourishes it, and prepares it for harvest. In due time, the harvest appears. The same is true in life. You may give today and feel as though nothing changed, but unseen, the spiritual soil has received it, and at the appointed time, the harvest will manifest. Fear often whispers the lie that if you give, you will not have enough. This is the mindset of scarcity, the belief that supply is limited and must be clutched tightly. But generosity is an act of defiance against fear. It declares, I believe in the endless treasury of heaven. I believe that what I sow will return multiplied. I believe that God's supply cannot be exhausted. Each act of generosity silences fear and demonstrates faith. And heaven always honors faith. Generosity also expands capacity. When you pour out, you make room to receive more. A vessel already full cannot be filled further. But when you empty it into others' lives, the divine banker refills it with overflow. This is why the generous often find themselves constantly replenished. It is not luck. It is law. It is the working of a spiritual principle that cannot be broken. As water flows freely through a channel, so blessings flow through the life of the generous. The channel never runs dry because it is constantly refreshed. Another aspect of generosity is that it goes beyond money. Time, encouragement, compassion, forgiveness, all these are forms of giving. When you give time to listen to someone in pain, you are sowing seed. When you release words of encouragement, you are sowing seed. When you forgive, you are sowing seed. And all of these return as multiplied blessings. You may find peace where others are restless, favor where others are rejected, opportunities where others are blocked. These are not random occurrences. They are the dividends of generosity. The divine banker multiplies not only the seed but also the joy of the giver. There is a unique freedom in giving. To hold tightly is to live in fear of loss. To release freely is to live in trust of abundance. The generous person sleeps better, worries less, and walks lighter. This joy itself is part of the return, for what is wealth without peace of mind? Generosity enriches both giver and receiver. It transforms not just circumstances but the heart itself. There is also a principle of proportion in generosity. It is not about the size of the gift, but the spirit of the giver. A wealthy person may give large sums, but if it costs them nothing, it is not true generosity. A person of little means may give a small coin, but if it is given with faith and love, heaven sees it as a great deposit. The divine banker does not measure by amounts, but by intent. Generosity is not about impressing others, but about trusting God enough to release what you have. Obedience and generosity often walk hand in hand. Sometimes the divine banker nudges your heart to give in specific ways. It may not make sense. It may stretch you beyond comfort, but when you obey, you activate a flow that would not otherwise have opened. The widow of Zarephath, instructed to give her last meal to the prophet, obeyed, and her jar of oil did not run dry. The boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish gave them into the hands of Jesus, and they fed thousands with baskets left over. These acts of obedience and generosity unlocked miracles that logic could not predict. Generosity is also a weapon against greed. Greed enslaves, convincing people that they must always gather more, hoard more, secure more. But generosity breaks greed's chains. It says, "I do not fear lack, because I live under divine supply." In releasing, you prove that possessions do not possess you. You prove that your heart is not tied to material things, but anchored in the abundance of heaven. This freedom invites even greater blessings, because heaven trusts the one who will not be enslaved by wealth. One of the greatest blessings of generosity is its ripple effect. When you sow into others' lives, they in turn are empowered to sow into others. A single act of kindness multiplies beyond your sight. You may never know the full impact of your giving until eternity, when the divine banker reveals the chain of harvests, triggered by one seed. What you release may feed not just one, but many, not just today, but for generations. To live under the first law of divine finance is to embrace a lifestyle, not just an occasional act. Generosity becomes your nature, not a rare gesture. You wake each day asking, "How can I give? How can I sow?" And in doing so, you keep your account in constant motion. Deposits flow in, withdrawals flow out. The cycle never stops. You live in rhythm with heaven's economy, and your life becomes a testimony that God's law of increase is true. Generosity secures your partnership with the divine banker. You are no longer a fearful hoarder, but a faithful steward. You recognize that everything you have was given, and therefore, everything you release can return in greater measure. You live with open hands, confident that heaven's supply is endless, and that every seed sown is a deposit in an account that never fails. Generosity is the first law, and when it governs your life, you unlock streams of blessing that no earthly system can explain. Expectancy is required for withdrawal, because expectancy is faith dressed in anticipation. It is one thing to believe in theory that God provides, but it is another to stand at the counter of heaven with confidence, waiting for the promise to be released. Expectancy is not passive, it is an active positioning of the heart that says, "I know my divine banker has already approved this transaction, and I will not leave empty-handed." In the natural, when you hand a signed check to a bank teller, you do not walk away before they return with your cash. You stand there confident that the exchange is in process. In the same way, When you bring your petitions and your faith to God, you must wait with expectancy, believing that the process is unfolding even when you cannot see it yet. Expectancy requires vision beyond the visible. It looks beyond the delay, beyond the silence, beyond the current balance, and sees the invisible supply of heaven. Many people pray without expectancy, and so their prayers become empty rituals rather than transactions of faith. They ask, but they do not expect. They speak, but their hearts remain unsure. And because expectancy is missing, they walk away from the counter of heaven before the withdrawal has been processed. Expectancy is the difference between wishing and receiving, between hoping vaguely and holding tangibly. To live in expectancy is to prepare for what has not yet arrived. A farmer does not sow seed and then walk away in doubt. He sows and then prepares his barns. He waters the soil, clears the weeds, and waits with patience, knowing the harvest is inevitable. Expectancy does the same in the spiritual life. If you are believing for provision, expectancy means preparing to handle the provision. If you are believing for healing, expectancy means living as though recovery is already in motion. If you are believing for opportunity, expectancy means equipping yourself for the door that is about to open. Without expectancy, faith remains incomplete. For faith believes, but expectancy positions itself to receive. Expectancy also guards against discouragement. The waiting period between deposit and withdrawal can feel long, and many faint in the gap, but expectancy strengthens the heart. It whispers, "It's on the way." It reminds you that the divine banker never loses records, never misplaces transactions, never denies a valid request. Expectancy is what keeps hope alive during silence. It keeps you praising while others are complaining. It keeps you standing when others have given up. To expect is to remain anchored in the certainty that God is faithful to His word. The power of expectancy is illustrated in countless stories. Consider the lame man at the gate, called Beautiful. He looked up at Peter and John, expecting to receive something from them, and that expectancy positioned him for a miracle beyond his imagination. He expected coins, but heaven delivered healing. His expectancy drew down something greater than what he had even asked for. This is the nature of expectancy. It not only secures what you ask, but often attracts more than you envision. Expectancy is not arrogance. It is not demanding from God, as though He is obligated. It is humble confidence, rooted in His nature and His promises. Just as a child asks a parent for bread and expects to be fed, so expectancy rests in the character of God as a good Father. It is the natural posture of trust, the natural response of one who knows that God's word cannot fail. To lack expectancy is to question His faithfulness. To live in expectancy is to honor His reliability. One of the ways expectancy manifests is through thanksgiving in advance. Gratitude after receiving is natural, but gratitude before receiving is expectancy. It says, "I thank you not because I see it, but because I know it is already settled." This kind of thanksgiving is powerful because it demonstrates that you are not waiting to feel blessed before you act blessed. You are already celebrating, already preparing, already rejoicing, because the outcome is guaranteed. The divine banker sees this advance gratitude as evidence that you are truly ready for the withdrawal. Expectancy also attracts alignment. When you expect something, you begin to think, act, and speak in harmony with that expectation. If you expect failure, you unconsciously prepare for it. If you expect lack, you subconsciously sabotage abundance. But if you expect divine provision, Your words shift. Your choices shift. Your perspective shifts. You begin to speak the language of faith. You begin to prepare for growth. You begin to see opportunities where others see obstacles. Expectancy tunes your heart to heaven's frequency, and in that alignment, blessings flow more freely. The absence of expectancy often comes from disappointment. People prayed once and did not see the answer, so they lowered their hope to avoid pain. They asked for big things, saw delay, and shrunk their prayers to small requests. Over time, expectancy is replaced with resignation. But this is a trap. Just because one seed takes longer to sprout does not mean the soil has failed. Just because one transaction takes longer to process does not mean the divine banker has denied it. Expectancy must be restored by remembering his past faithfulness. Every blessing you already hold is proof that he delivers. Let that memory fuel new expectancy for what is still to come. Expectancy requires persistence. It does not quit at the first obstacle. It does not walk away when answers seem slow. Like a customer waiting for funds to be counted, expectancy waits patiently until the promise is handed over. This persistence is not stubbornness but trust. It believes that delays are not denials. It holds on because it knows that heaven's timing is perfect. When you remain expectant, you discover that many blessings were simply waiting for the right moment, not the wrong promise. Expectancy also honors the greatness of God. To expect little is to think little of Him. To expect much is to honor His limitless power. The divine banker is not limited by your requests. His treasury does not shrink when you ask boldly. In fact, bold expectancy delights Him, because it shows you truly believe His vault is infinite. Too many limit their withdrawals by asking for crumbs when heaven offers feasts. Expectancy lifts your request to match the abundance of His supply. Living in expectancy transforms everyday life. You rise in the morning looking for favor, looking for open doors, looking for provision. You walk into meetings expecting opportunity. You face challenges, expecting solutions. You end your day expecting fresh mercy in the morning. This mindset changes everything. It lifts you out of despair and places you in continual anticipation of God's goodness. You become like a watchman, waiting for the dawn, certain that light will come, because it always does. And here lies the secret. Expectancy itself is magnetic. Just as faith draws from heaven's treasury, expectancy positions you where blessings arrive. When you expect, you notice opportunities others miss. You recognize provision others overlook. You walk through doors others ignore. Expectancy sharpens your vision and tunes your heart, making you a magnet for divine favor. Every withdrawal from heaven's account requires it. Faith is the signature, but expectancy is the waiting posture at the counter. Without it, people walk away too soon, leaving behind blessings that were already approved. With it they remain until their arms are filled, their hearts are strengthened, and their needs are met. Expectancy is not optional, it is essential. It is the spiritual posture that ensures every transaction of faith is completed. Alignment keeps the account flowing, because the currency of heaven operates on harmony with divine principles. Just as earthly banking systems require identity verification, accurate records, and compliance with rules in order to keep accounts active, the divine banker requires the alignment of your heart, mind, and actions with His eternal laws. Alignment is not about perfection, but about living in sync with truth, faith, love, and obedience. When you remain aligned, your spiritual account flows without interruption. When misalignment enters through bitterness, dishonesty, or doubt, the channel of blessing is slowed, not because God withdraws His goodness, but because disconnection blocks the flow. Alignment is like keeping the banking pipeline unclogged, ensuring that withdrawals of peace, provision, and power continue unhindered. Alignment begins in the heart. A heart anchored in faith opens wide the channels of heaven's supply. A heart weighed down by resentment, fear, or envy creates blockages. Imagine trying to use a card at the bank while the account is flagged for suspicious activity. Until the situation is resolved, access is limited. Spiritually, when you allow unforgiveness or dishonesty to reign in your heart, it creates a fraud alert that disturbs the flow. The divine banker cannot release unlimited blessing into an account where selfishness or malice rules, because those blessings would be misused or wasted. Alignment purifies the account, ensuring that what flows through you blesses not only you, but also those around you. Alignment also shows in the words you speak. Words are like authorizations in the spiritual banking system. Every time you speak faith, you authorize the release of divine transactions. Every time you speak fear, doubt, or complaint, you cancel or delay the flow. Words are not harmless. They are either withdrawals or blockages. A person who prays for abundance but constantly speaks of lack lives in contradiction, and contradiction disrupts alignment. The divine banker responds to consistent faith, not double-minded declaration. Alignment requires your speech to match your belief, your confession to match your prayer, your declaration to match your expectation. Actions, too, play a crucial role in alignment. You cannot expect the blessings of divine provision while engaging in practices that dishonor God or harm others. Just as banks require lawful transactions, heaven's account requires righteous living. Integrity, honesty, generosity, and compassion are all signs of an aligned account. When your actions align with divine principles, you demonstrate trustworthiness with heavenly resources. The divine banker delights to pour out more on those who handle what they already have with wisdom and kindness. Those who misuse blessings or exploit others invite blockages to their flow. Alignment in action is like maintaining good credit. It shows you are reliable, and the system responds by extending more. Alignment is also about forgiveness. A heart that holds grudges or refuses to release past pain carries the weight of misalignment. Forgiveness is like clearing a blocked channel. Until it happens, the flow remains hindered. Many live in spiritual overdraft because they cling to offense. They pray for peace and prosperity, but unforgiveness clogs the account. The divine banker requires forgiveness not to punish, but to protect you, because bitterness consumes spiritual capital. Forgiveness restores balance and allows blessings to move freely again. Gratitude is another powerful form of alignment. A grateful heart keeps the account open, while ingratitude shuts it down. Gratitude is the acknowledgement of deposits already received, and it signals readiness for more. Just as banks look for activity to keep accounts alive, gratitude is the spiritual activity that shows your account is active. A person who constantly complains about what they lack demonstrates misalignment with heaven's abundance, while one who continually gives thanks demonstrates readiness for more withdrawal. Gratitude is alignment in attitude, a steady flow of acknowledgement that maintains open communication with the divine banker. Alignment requires consistency, not perfection. It is not about never failing, but about returning quickly to the path when you stumble. Even when a check bounces in the natural, a bank allows reconciliation and restoration of trust through correction. In the same way, missteps do not permanently close your spiritual account if you realign through repentance, faith, and renewed commitment. The divine banker values sincerity and effort. What matters is that you continually adjust your life toward his principles, like a compass pointing north, ensuring that you are not drifting away from the source of blessing. Alignment also involves stewardship. If you waste or neglect the resources already entrusted to you, your account flow will not increase. To be aligned is to value what you already have, to handle money, time, relationships, and opportunities with care and faithfulness. The divine banker increases the flow where he sees responsibility. Misalignment comes when you despise small beginnings, mishandle opportunities, or fail to recognize blessings already in your possession. Proper stewardship signals to heaven that you are aligned and trustworthy, and so more is released into your care. Obedience plays a vital role in alignment. The divine banker often gives instructions tied to the flow of blessing. Sometimes he prompts you to give, forgive, move, wait, or act in faith. Ignoring those instructions is like ignoring the terms of your account. Obedience is not about earning blessings, but about staying connected to the source. When you align with his promptings, you place yourself under the open windows of heaven. Disobedience closes those windows, not because God desires lack for you, but because misalignment blocks the natural flow of abundance. Alignment through obedience is simply walking in rhythm with divine timing. Alignment even touches your thought life. Thoughts are seeds that either fertilize or poison your account. When your thoughts are constantly negative, fearful, or envious, you attract misalignment. The divine banker looks for minds renewed by faith, filled with hope, and anchored in truth. A mind aligned with faith thinks in terms of possibilities, abundance, and growth. Misaligned thinking sees only scarcity, competition, and failure. Alignment requires continual renewal of the mind, replacing lies with truth, fear with faith, and doubt with confidence. Living in alignment produces peace, because you no longer fear the closing of your account. You know the flow is steady as long as you remain connected. You stop worrying about lack because you understand that misalignment, not scarcity, is the only true threat. Alignment produces confidence because you know you are in step with eternal laws. It produces joy because you recognize blessings in every season. It produces generosity because you know giving never depletes your account, but only expands it. When alignment is kept, the flow is unstoppable. Earthly banks may fail, currencies may collapse, but the account of heaven never runs dry. As long as alignment remains, blessings continue. You may not always see the timing, but the flow is guaranteed. Alignment is the safeguard, the verification, the maintenance that keeps everything in motion. Just as an aligned wheel moves smoothly on the road, so an aligned life moves smoothly in the economy of heaven. The divine banker desires nothing more than to release unlimited supply, but he requires alignment for your protection. Without it, blessings would overwhelm or destroy, rather than uplift. With it, blessings enrich, strengthen, and multiply. Alignment is the unseen agreement that keeps the account alive, active, and abundant. The flow is not random, it follows the lines of alignment. Wherever you are aligned, heaven's supply will manifest. Whenever you drift out of alignment, the flow will pause until you return. In this way, alignment is both the key and the safeguard, the assurance that the account remains open and the blessings continue to pour. Earthly income is only a channel, not the source, because the flow of provision does not begin with your employer, your business, your clients, or any human institution. It begins in the invisible storehouse of God. Many people confuse the channel with the source. They believe that if they lose a job, their supply has been cut off. They think if a business fails, their future is destroyed. They imagine that if people stop supporting them, they will be left with nothing. but those are merely pipes through which the water of divine provision flows. The water does not come from the pipe, it comes from the wellspring. A channel may change, but the source never changes. To place ultimate trust in the channel is to live in constant anxiety, for channels can break, dry up, or shift without notice. To place trust in the source is to live in peace, for the fountain never runs dry. When you recognize God as the true source of your supply, you stop idolizing jobs, salaries, or markets. You begin to see them for what they are, temporary instruments chosen for a season. A farmer knows that rain can come from different clouds, yet the origin is always the same sky. In the same way, money, opportunities, and support may come from various directions, but their origin is always divine. When one cloud passes, another will gather. When one door closes, another will open. When one stream dries, another begins to flow. The source is constant even when channels shift. This truth liberates the soul from fear. Imagine the anxiety of believing that your employer holds your destiny, that your paycheck is the limit of your provision. That mindset chains you to fear of loss, fear of economic downturn, fear of rejection. But when you realize the employer is merely a channel, you are free. If they let you go, God will open another channel. If the business slows, God will birth new ideas. If one person withdraws support, God will stir another to step forward. The source is unfailing, and the channels are limitless. Understanding this principle changes your relationship with money. Instead of clinging tightly to every dollar, fearful it may be your last, you release it with the confidence that more will come. If you think money comes only from your job, you fear spending, giving, or sowing, because you imagine the faucet can turn off at any moment. But when you know the source is infinite, you can give with peace and invest with joy, knowing that the divine banker has endless channels to replenish you. It also changes how you see people. You stop putting unrealistic expectations on them to sustain you. You may appreciate an employer, a client, or a benefactor, but you do not worship them or depend on them as if they were the source. You treat them with gratitude, but your eyes remain on the one behind them. This keeps relationships healthy, because you no longer manipulate or cling to people out of fear of losing supply. You know that if one person walks away, another will appear. The channel may shift, but the source remains unchanged. This principle also brings hope in times of transition. Perhaps you are in a season where income has dried up, and the familiar channels no longer flow. Fear whispers that all is lost. But look beyond the channel and remember the source. Just as rivers change course over time, but the ocean remains vast, your life may see channels shift, but the abundance of the source is unchanged. Trusting the source opens your eyes to new opportunities you would have missed if you kept staring at the empty channel. Many have discovered new careers, businesses, or paths precisely when an old channel closed. The closing was not punishment, but redirection, guiding them toward a better flow. When you make the mistake of worshiping the channel, you limit yourself. You say, "My salary is fixed, so my provision is fixed." Yet heaven's supply is not bound by earthly figures. God can increase your provision through unexpected bonuses, gifts, opportunities, or ideas. The channel of your job may provide a certain amount, but the source is unlimited. Those who understand this principle stay open to expansion, refusing to be boxed in by the limitations of a single channel. They know that divine creativity has countless ways to increase them. Another aspect of this truth is that no human can truly take away your provision. They may block one channel, but they cannot block the source. If someone withholds payment, betrays your trust, or refuses to support you, it may sting for a moment, but it cannot cut you off from the flow of supply. In fact, often their withholding forces you to discover new channels you had ignored. The source never abandons you. What people mean for harm, the source can transform into redirection for good. Recognizing God as the source also demands humility. If you begin to see yourself as the source of your wealth, your talent, your effort, your intelligence, you risk pride, and pride misaligns the account. Yes, your talents and efforts matter, but they are tools entrusted to you by the source. Without the breath of life, the mind to think, the health to act, and the opportunities that appeared before you, none of your achievements would exist. Pride blinds you to the source and makes you cling to channels as if you were self-sustaining. Humility keeps your heart open, always acknowledging where the flow truly begins. This principle also protects you during economic storms. When markets crash, currencies devalue, or industries collapse, those who trust the channel panic, for their foundation crumbles. Those who trust the source remain calm, for they know the source is not shaken by economic conditions. In fact, many thrive in downturns, because while others despair, they see new channels rising. Their security is not tied to numbers in a market, but to the infinite reservoir of the divine banker. Seeing God as the source also inspires generosity. When you know the well never runs dry, you are not afraid to pour water into other cups. You realize you are not depleting your supply, but participating in the circulation of abundance. Generosity creates new channels, because the more you give, the more space you create for flow to return. Those who cling tightly to channels fear loss, and often end up losing anyway. Those who trust the source release freely and find themselves continually replenished. Knowing that earthly income is only a channel sets your heart at rest. You no longer live in fear of layoffs, downturns, or rejection. You no longer chain your future to a single paycheck or a single benefactor. You live in the security of an eternal source that cannot fail. You can look at a dried-up channel and smile, knowing that new ones are forming beyond your sight. You can give generously without fear, knowing that what leaves your hand never leaves your account. You can walk through transitions with peace, knowing that the one who opened yesterday's doors can open tomorrow's. The source is steady, unchanging, and infinite. Channels come and go, but the wellspring of divine provision remains forever. The divine banker uses many ways to transfer blessings, and the mistake most people make is to assume that provision can only come through the obvious channels they already know. They look only to their job, their paycheck, or the predictable streams, and when those appear small, they panic. But divine supply is not bound by human imagination. The source is infinite, and the delivery systems are beyond what the human mind can calculate. If one window seems closed, the divine banker has countless other windows through which blessings can pour. When you open your heart to this truth, you begin to live in expectancy instead of anxiety, for you know that the ways of provision are as varied as the waves of the sea. Sometimes blessings come through ideas. A simple thought, a spark of creativity, or a moment of inspiration can open doors of wealth and opportunity far greater than any paycheck. History is filled with people who received an inspired idea that changed their lives forever. That idea was not random, it was a divine deposit. When you trust that the divine banker transfers blessings through inspiration, you treat every thought with reverence. You quiet your mind to listen, because within that stillness may come the blueprint for your next season of abundance. Many overlook these transfers because they are waiting for money to drop into their hands, but money often comes as the fruit of an inspired idea. Other times, blessings come through people. Someone you meet by chance may be the channel for your next opportunity. A conversation, an introduction, or even a stranger's act of kindness can shift the entire trajectory of your life. These are not coincidences. They are divine appointments arranged by the banker who knows exactly how to route resources. When you live in awareness of this, you stop dismissing people as random and begin to recognize the invisible orchestration of connection. The right person at the right time is often the vehicle of supply. That is why generosity, kindness, and integrity are so vital. You never know which relationship is the key to unlocking your next blessing. Blessings also come through opportunities disguised as challenges. Sometimes what looks like a closed door is actually a hidden passage. You may face a setback, but within it lies the seed of a new beginning. A business may fail, but in that failure you discover resilience, creativity, and an idea that brings greater success. A job loss may feel devastating, but it can push you into a career path you never would have pursued otherwise. The divine banker often disguises blessings in adversity so that you grow into the person who can handle them. When you trust that every challenge contains hidden provision, you face life with courage, knowing that even in loss there is the possibility of gain. Another method of divine transfer is through intuition and inner guidance. A nudge to take a certain path, make a phone call, or apply for something may seem small, but following it can lead to unexpected provision. The divine banker works through the language of the heart, as much as through visible channels. Many miss their blessing because they ignore the inner whisper that says, "Go here, do this, reach out." The more you cultivate trust in your inner guidance, the more you align yourself with unseen currents of supply. Provision flows to those who move in faith, even when the steps seem illogical. Provision can also come through unexpected gifts. Sometimes, without warning, someone gives, supports, or blesses you in ways you never anticipated. These moments are reminders that the divine banker does not operate by human schedules or expectations. Just as a sudden rain shower can drench dry land, a sudden blessing can appear and change your condition instantly. This is why expectancy is so important. If you live only in logic, you dismiss miracles, but if you live in faith, you recognize gifts as part of the divine circulation. At times, blessings arrive through the expansion of your own abilities. The divine banker may increase your wisdom, skill, or capacity so that you can step into new levels of provision. This is not always money handed to you, but the strengthening of what is within you so that wealth can flow through your hands. The ability to manage, create, or lead may be sharpened, and that sharpening becomes the transfer of blessing. There are also seasons when blessings are transferred through divine timing. You may have been faithful for years, sowing seeds without seeing harvest. Then suddenly, in a moment you could not predict, doors open and opportunities blossom. This timing is not random. It is divine orchestration. Just as a farmer cannot force the harvest before its season, you cannot always force provision to appear on your schedule. But when the time is right, the divine banker releases accumulated blessings, often exceeding what you expect. Understanding this keeps you from discouragement, for you know that delay is not denial but preparation for the appointed moment. Provision sometimes comes disguised in service. When you help others, give of yourself, or invest in someone's dream, the blessing circles back to you in ways you could not plan. The divine banker multiplies generosity, ensuring that what you release returns multiplied. Many people chase wealth directly, but those who serve often find that wealth chases them. Fear and doubt bankrupt faith because they work like thieves in the night, robbing the soul of its confidence and draining the spiritual account of its abundance. Faith is the key that unlocks the vault of heaven, but fear is the lock that keeps it shut. Doubt is the shadow that obscures the light of provision, convincing the heart that perhaps the promise will not come true, that maybe the divine banker has forgotten the request, that the account is empty. Yet faith knows better. It knows that every word spoken by God is sure, every promise backed by infinite resources, every deposit already secured. Fear and doubt, however, weaken the hands that hold the check of faith, making it impossible to cash in what is already yours. Imagine someone standing at a bank counter with a check in their hand. The account is filled, the check is valid, the funds are ready, but if the person doubts that the banker will honor it, they may turn away before presenting it. Or if they fear rejection, they may tear it up in despair. That is exactly what fear and doubt do in the spiritual life. They cause people to walk away from answers that are already prepared, provisions that are already theirs. The funds of heaven remain untouched, not because they were not available, but because fear and doubt canceled the transaction. Fear speaks in 1,000 disguises. It says, "What if the money doesn't come in time? What if the opportunity falls through? What if I lose everything I've worked for? What if God doesn't come through for me this time?" Each what if is a withdrawal slip, with no signature. Faith, however, does not ask, "What if?" in the negative. Faith asks, "What if?" in the positive. What if the door opens tomorrow? What if the provision is already on its way? What if God has something greater than I imagined? Faith magnifies expectation, while fear shrinks it. Faith draws supply like a magnet, while doubt repels it. To live in fear and doubt is like sowing seeds into rocky soil. They may sprout for a moment, but they wither quickly, because the ground is not secure. To live in faith is to plant in fertile ground where the harvest is inevitable. Many people sabotage their own blessings by entertaining fear. They may pray in faith for provision, but then spend hours worrying about how it will come, when it will come, or whether it will come at all. That worry cancels out the prayer, like writing a deposit slip and then ripping it up before handing it in. Prayer mixed with fear is unstable, and an unstable request cannot be processed in the divine economy. This is why faith must be unwavering. It is not enough to believe once and then worry for days. It is a continual stance, a steady confidence that the promise is already secure. Doubt is often rooted in looking too much at circumstances. A person sees the dwindling bank account, the closed doors, the lack of opportunities, and concludes that nothing can change. But circumstances are only temporary. They are the appearance, not the reality. Faith does not deny the appearance, but it looks beyond it, to the reality of God's provision. Doubt clings to the visible. Faith clings to the invisible. Doubt says, "I'll believe it when I see it." Faith says, "I believe it, therefore I will see it." One waits for proof before trusting. The other trusts and therefore receives proof. Fear is also contagious. It spreads like a disease through conversations, media, and the atmosphere of a world obsessed with scarcity. Listen long enough to news of economic collapse, rising prices, or global instability, and fear will creep into the heart, whispering that survival is impossible. Yet faith is also contagious, spreading through testimonies, affirmations, and bold declarations. That is why it is vital to guard the mind, to feed it daily with words of truth and promise rather than fear-driven reports. Every fearful thought is a withdrawal. Every faithful thought is a deposit. The bankruptcy caused by fear and doubt is not just financial. It affects peace, health, relationships, and creativity. A fearful mind cannot think clearly or innovate. A doubting heart cannot trust deeply or love freely. Anxiety drains energy, while faith replenishes it. Many miss divine ideas and opportunities because fear paralyzed them before they acted. They asked for guidance, but doubted when the idea came, thinking it was too risky. They asked for provision, but feared giving, so they withheld and never reaped the return. In this way, fear and doubt become self-fulfilling prophecies, creating the very lack they dread. But the moment fear is cast out and faith restored, the account reopens. The bankruptcy is reversed, the flow of supply resumes, the blessings hidden behind the veil of doubt come rushing forward. Even a small act of faith can restart the circulation. One step taken in trust, one declaration spoken in confidence, one seed sown despite fear. All of these are signatures of faith, authorizing heaven to release its resources again. The divine banker is always ready, but he requires the currency of faith to complete the exchange. Consider how fear and doubt contrast with gratitude. Gratitude affirms that the supply is already present, even before it is seen. It is faith in action. Fear, on the other hand, affirms that the supply may not come, and in doing so, it shuts the door. Gratitude says, "Thank you for what is already on the way." Fear says, "What if nothing comes?" One multiplies blessings, the other withholds them. Fear is a natural instinct, but it is not meant to govern the spiritual life. It may knock at the door, but faith must answer. Doubt may whisper, but trust must speak louder. You do not need to eliminate all fearful thoughts to live by faith. You simply need to refuse to obey them. A fearful thought can come, but you can answer it with truth. I will not fear, for the Lord is my supply. I will not doubt, for his promises are sure. Each time you answer fear and doubt with faith, you strengthen your account, build your confidence, and align more fully with divine provision. The essence of this truth is simple. Fear and doubt bankrupt faith, because they undermine the very trust required to draw from God's abundance. Faith is the currency of heaven, the authorization for every blessing, the signature that cashes every promise. Without it, the account remains untouched, even though it is overflowing. With it, nothing can be withheld. To overcome fear and doubt is to regain access to unlimited supply, to step into peace, and to live in the certainty that the divine banker never fails. Confidence in God's economy brings peace, because it shifts the focus of the heart and mind away from the instability of the world and anchors it in the certainty of divine provision. The systems of this world are fragile. Markets rise and fall, jobs come and go, economies crash, and even the most trusted institutions can crumble overnight. To place one's hope in these systems is to constantly live in anxiety, for nothing built by human hands can be fully secure. But when a person recognizes that God himself is the source of supply, and that his treasury is never exhausted, their soul rests in peace. They know that their provision does not depend solely on earthly factors, but on the eternal storehouse that cannot be shaken. This peace is not the absence of challenges, but the assurance that challenges cannot cut off the flow of divine supply. Confidence in God's economy teaches that even when one stream dries up, another will open, because the source is never limited to a single channel. Those who lack this confidence often live in turmoil. They watch the news, see predictions of financial downturns, and allow fear to dominate their thoughts. They compare themselves to others, measure their security by their bank account, and lie awake at night wondering if tomorrow will bring disaster. Their peace is fragile because it is based on circumstances. When times are good, they are at ease. When times are bad, they collapse under worry. But the one who trusts in God's economy rests even in storms. They can sit calmly in a world filled with panic, knowing that heaven's vaults are untouched by earthly crisis. Peace rooted in divine confidence is powerful because it liberates the mind from the slavery of scarcity thinking. Scarcity breeds anxiety, the belief that there is never enough, that you must scramble and fight for survival, that someone else's gain means your loss. But in God's economy, abundance is infinite. The blessing of one does not diminish the blessing available to another. The one who understands this truth walks in peace, no longer threatened by competition or consumed by jealousy. They can rejoice in another's prosperity because they know it is proof of the same supply available to them. Peace flows naturally from this abundance mindset, for there is no fear of missing out when the source is inexhaustible. This confidence also transforms how people handle delays and waiting periods. In the world's system, waiting for provision can bring deep stress, because it seems like wasted time or evidence of lack. But in God's economy, waiting is simply preparation. Peace comes from knowing that what is delayed is not denied, and that unseen forces are aligning circumstances for perfect timing. A person who trusts in divine supply does not collapse in impatience, because their confidence assures them that when the appointed time comes, nothing will stop the blessing. This quiet assurance produces rest, even in seasons of apparent stillness. Furthermore, confidence in God's economy produces peace because it frees the soul from striving. Many live under constant pressure to make things happen, exhausting themselves with endless schemes, manipulations, and overwork. They believe provision depends solely on their effort, so they push beyond their limits, draining their energy, relationships, and health. But the one who trusts in God's supply understands that their effort is only part of the equation. They work diligently, but without anxiety, knowing that increase comes from God. They plant seeds, but God gives the harvest. They step into opportunities, but God multiplies the result. This awareness lifts the crushing weight of self-dependence and replaces it with the peace of partnership with the divine. Peace also arises from knowing that divine provision is tailored, not generic. God's economy does not hand out blessings randomly, but according to individual purpose and need. What you require is already accounted for in your heavenly account. This means you never need to fear lack in fulfilling your calling. Confidence in this truth silences the restless drive to compare your journey to others. You are not competing for limited resources. You are drawing from your personal portion, reserved for you alone. This knowledge brings rest to the heart and allows one to walk boldly in their path without fear of insufficiency. Confidence in God's economy also brings peace, because it breaks the cycle of fear-based decision-making. Many people make poor financial or life choices out of desperation, accepting jobs they dislike, clinging to toxic relationships, or compromising values, simply because they fear lack. But when a person is anchored in the certainty that God is their source, they are free to choose wisely and patiently. They no longer act from panic, but from peace. They can wait for the right opportunity rather than grasp at every possibility. This calmness leads to better outcomes, for decisions rooted in peace are aligned with divine wisdom. Another reason confidence brings peace is that it assures the believer that supply extends beyond money. God's economy includes ideas, health, relationships, creativity, and solutions. Often, people fixate only on financial provision, yet what they truly need may be wisdom, guidance, or inspiration. When they trust the fullness of divine supply, they stop worrying about narrow definitions of prosperity and embrace a holistic view. They know that whatever is required for their well-being, be it strength, peace of mind, or a fresh opportunity, will flow to them at the right time. This wide vision brings deep inner calm, because nothing is left outside the reach of provision. Peace flourishes in the atmosphere of gratitude, and gratitude flows naturally from confidence. When you believe God's economy is already at work, you thank Him even before you see the result. This gratitude magnifies peace, for it shifts attention from what is lacking to what is already secured. It transforms anxious waiting into joyful expectancy. Instead of worrying about how needs will be met, the heart celebrates the certainty that they already are, awaiting manifestation. Gratitude is the language of peace, and it grows stronger as confidence in divine provision deepens. Peace comes from knowing that God's economy cannot fail. Earthly systems collapse, currencies lose value, and wealth disappears overnight. But the storehouse of heaven remains unshaken. No crisis, no recession, no personal setback can bankrupt divine abundance. Confidence in this truth allows the believer to face uncertainty with serenity. They know that even in famine, there will be bread. Even in drought, there will be streams. Even in loss, there will be restoration. This assurance is the anchor of peace, holding steady in every storm. Peace is not passive, but active. It shapes the way one lives, speaks, and expects. The person who carries this peace becomes a witness to others. Their calm presence radiates assurance in a world full of fear. Their unwavering trust inspires others to seek the same confidence. This ripple effect extends the blessings of peace beyond the individual, proving that confidence in God's economy is not only personal wealth, but also a gift to the community. Confidence in God's economy brings peace because it